The date was June 22nd, 2007. A normal day, just like any other, but unbeknownst to many, an ominous storm was brewing in the Benoit household that would change the wrestling industry forever. The Benoit tragedy is notorious for being one of the worst tragedies in wrestling history, the incident drawing headlines for days and changed the very landscape of wrestling. At the time, those close or even acquainted with Benoit could not believe that the person they admired and revered could ever commit such a heinous act. It was difficult for anyone to believe that behind the facade of the perfect wrestler lay a man burdened by numerous problems. It was only after the incident that wrestlers began to reminisce about certain incidents that they now believe showed signs that all was not well with Benoit. But what were these indications that something was amiss with the beloved wrestler? Could such a tragedy have been stopped if action had been taken? To answer these questions, let's dive straight into the video. It's surprising, but some warning signs of Benoit's mental state were there even a decade before the incident occurred. In his podcast, Talk with Jericho, Jericho mentioned an incident that shed some light into the psyche of Chris Benoit in his younger days. During a tag match in New Japan Pro Wrestling in 1996, Y2J botched a dropkick on Chris Benoit, which only slightly missed its mark, but Benoit sold the move anyway. The spot happened so quickly that hardly anyone noticed the botch, but Benoit was very disappointed. Post-match, Jericho went looking for Benoit backstage and found him in the boiler room doing squats. When Jericho asked him what he was doing, Benoit told him that he was punishing himself by doing 500 squats as penance for making an unprofessional and rookie mistake of selling the botched move. In light of the horrific events that took place years later, it may seem that Benoit was not in the right frame of mind, even in his younger days. Jericho acknowledged that now, in hindsight, he understood that there were quite a few issues with him, even in the early days of their careers. Chris Benoit was known for being a respected professional wrestler with great technical prowess. Because of this, it is hard to imagine why this respected wrestler would take part in hazing younger superstars, something which seemed out of character for him. One such incident was when Benoit saw Miz eating chicken in the locker room and accused him of dropping food crumbs in his bag. The A-lister recalls that he hadn't dropped anything on his bag, but nonetheless apologized. Still, Chris blew the accusations out of proportion and banished him from the locker room, forcing the Miz to change in the restrooms meant for the audience. Another incident that came to light recently is from the current AEW announcer Justin Roberts. Roberts, in his book, mentions an incident where his first international trip with the WWE turned into a nightmare when he was put on a submission hold by both Benoit and Jamie Noble at the same time. However, to his surprise, Roberts also mentions Chris asking for permission to call Roberts' father, who was battling lung cancer at the time. So which was the real Benoit, the empathetic and respected wrestler, or a person dealing with many problems and frustrations? Even though at the time, such bullying and hazing incidents were not paid much attention to in the industry, Benoit's participation in these practices still seemed to be out of character for his personality. In an episode of The Dark Side of the Ring, friends of Benoit mentioned that in the months leading up to the tragedy, Benoit would exhibit extreme paranoia to the point of going through different routes when coming back home from the airport or going to the gym. He was also believed to switch cars every journey to escape the eyes of his imagined pursuers. This revelation was discussed further in a Talk is Jericho podcast featuring Benoit's sister-in-law, Sandra Toffaloni. Sandra would recount incidents where he would get up at night to check the alarm and other things as well, which was a complete shift from the laid-back person he knew Benoit to be. These seemed to be important factors that indicated that a change was taking place in Benoit's personality, but of course, no one could fathom that these would be a precursor to the horrible tragedy. The news of Eddie Gurrero's death sent the entire wrestling world in a state of shock. Family, friends, and companions were all heartbroken by the untimely death of the legendary performer, but the person most affected by Eddie's passing was Chris Benoit. Benoit, who was always known to be a man who refrained from being emotional, had been struck with incomprehensible grief. Even at Eddie's funeral, everyone noted that Benoit was deeply affected and needed to be consoled. Benoit was unable to cope with the grief of losing his friend, and instead of taking time off and seeking help, he dove deeper into his career, not taking any time off from WWE, and started becoming more and more distant from his loved ones. On Y2J's podcast featuring Benoit's sister-in-law Sandra Toffoloni, she mentions that Benoit and his wife Nancy were planning to start a wrestling school in Atlanta, since Chris was having a rough time working with the WWE after Eddie's passing. But Benoit was hesitant to leave the corporation, since he knew that he wouldn't be as well off financially as he would by staying with the WWE, and also because being a wrestler and a performer were the only things he ever knew. This angst was taking a toll on Chris both physically and mentally. Of course, throughout this duration, Benoit remained with the company and was continually booked in major storylines, with him burning away the thought of retiring. This begs the question that if Benoit was to leave, would things have turned out differently? The WWE Wellness program wasn't what it is now. In the old era, there were no stringent protocols in place to prevent wrestlers from using steroids and making them take time off during concussions. After the incident took place, the police found anabolic steroids in the Benoit household, and his body seemed to have 10 times the testosterone of a normal male his age. It was later revealed through various testimonies that Chris felt the need to maintain his buff figure, because back in his younger days, wrestlers who didn't possess big physiques were not taken seriously, and the bigger stars were not interested in wrestling them. Thus, his drive to possess a massive body pushed Chris to continually take steroids to maintain his buff physique even during concussions, which brings us to the other issue. Chris's wrestling style focused heavily on using his head for various moves, particularly his famous diving headbutt. Furthermore, in those days, there were no barriers to prevent wrestlers from taking direct chair shots to the head, which ultimately caused Chris to suffer multiple concussions during his career, and even while injured, Chris rarely took any time off. After the tragedy, Chris's father, Michael Benoit, sent his brain to be tested at the Sports Legacy Institute, hoping to find some answers. The institute revealed that Benoit's brain was similar to that of an 80-year-old Alzheimer's patient, and this was no condition of the brain of a 40-year-old male. The researchers theorized that such a severely damaged brain could cause dementia, making the person to exhibit behavioral problems. Naturally, the WWE found themselves in hot waters post the incident and were forced to apply stringent protocols to monitor the well-being of their performers. But the question remains, if things were more strict back then, would this have prevented Benoit from committing these horrible acts? If you've enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more awesome wrestling content. This is Reese from WrestleFaction, signing off.